Dr. Ward, correct?
Yes. Hi,
You there?
everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Can folks on Zoom hear me well? Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Okay. So I am going to get started. Thank you to the organizers of today's wonderful series of conversations. Thank you for the invitation to allow me to be part of this gathering of scholars, activists, artists, and storytellers. So our panel was presented with a series of questions to guide our discussion on cultural production and placemaking. So I've used these questions to organize my remarks for today. And let me just add a brief shout out. I'm sad that I couldn't be there with you in person. In fact, I'm spending the evening at my daughter's orchestra concert. So as a result, I couldn't be on campus today, but I wanted to give a special shout out and hello to my colleague, Grisha Coleman. So I wish I could see you, but they're in spirit. So there we go. So the first question we were presented with is, why are the arts so important to the understanding of people and place? And I want to begin with this definition of Black placemaking that's offered by Marcus Anthony Hunter and a series of co-authors in their essay, Black Placemaking, Celebration, Play, and Poetry. This essay came out several years ago in Theory, Culture, and Society. And they define Black placemaking as a framework that accounts for the relationship between structure and agency, domination and resistance through the creation of sites of endurance, belonging, and resistance through social interaction. So this is really a good sort of starting point. I always like to kind of start my presentations with some level setting of language so that we can all be on the same page about what we mean when we use language like placemaking, equitable placemaking, et cetera. And in this essay, they talk explicitly about Chicago. They use examples from the city of Chicago to talk about the ways in which Black urban communities invest people power, time, labor into the formation of physical communal spaces to deepen social interaction and also to resist certain forms of urban development and disinvestment in the urban space. So here I want to offer a definition of equitable creative placemaking that comes from ASU's Studio for Creativity, Place, and Equitable Communities. I'm currently a faculty fellow in the studio, and I'm working on a grant-funded project on BIPOC arts networks in the Southwest. I'm not going to talk about that project. I'm going to talk about a different project today, but I wanted to sort of, again, give a shout out to the studio and the important work that they're doing. So they define equitable creative placemaking as the strategic integration of arts, culture, and community engaged design into comprehensive community planning and development work. We engage the imagination of people to create healthy, vibrant, equitable communities. So it's the idea that all communities have cultural assets from which to build upon. And these cultural assets include creativity, imagination, and the wisdom of residents. Or I'll use another phrase that a recent master student in the School of Social Transformation, Ursula and I actually had the benefit of serving on his committee, and he just successfully passed last week. And he uses the concept of wisdom practitioners. So this idea that we are turning to people as a way of galvanizing our understanding of how to design communities, both physical design and design also in the sort of relational or interpersonal way. And art, culture, and community engaged design are critical elements for elements of strategies for building more just communities that really contributes to a range of community formations and community sort of interactions, things like strengthening the community fabric, physical transformation of places, changes in how we talk about a community, what's the story, what's the narrative of the community, as well as the health and economic development of a community. Creative placemaking and placekeeping. So we use this language of placekeeping to talk about how we maintain our connection to the spaces that we occupy. So these things show up as artists and designers and cultural bearers being at decision-making tables, right? Helping to frame social policy and planning issues, and also helping to define solutions to common community problems. Initiatives to reclaim cultural and aesthetic and design practices among populations that have been historically the targets of assimilation or historically marginalized communities. Another word that we often use more frequently is thinking of these as not just marginalized communities, but communities that represent the global majority. And finally, efforts that encourage all community residents to activate their creativity in service of short and long-term efforts towards social change and well-being. Many of you know the work of Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson, who's the founding director of the studio, and she now serves as the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. I want to present some of Maria's foundational approaches here to understanding how the assets and practices of arts organizations work to improve the health and well-being of communities. First, she argues that all people have the capacity to be creative, and that creativity is an individual and community asset from which we build. Second is that the ability for people to express and to tell their own stories on their own terms, these are critical elements or critical dimensions of justice work and equity work, right? Being the agent of my own narrative and of my own story. That is part of the American ethos. Third, that arts and cultural activity happens in many diverse places, community centers, commercial venues, parks, public streets, and not only in cultural presenting venues, right? So think about, for example, schools, universities, the ways in which our spaces become places that we occupy to do this kind of cultural engagement work. Fourth, that art process can be as important as, or even in some cases more important than the product itself. So art process connotes the relationship building and the emphasis on prioritizing right relationships over the production of an art product, right? Because product connotes something that is for sale, something that is a commodity. And so this is about how we build relationship through the process of coming together to make art, to do creative work, to imagine. Fifth, artists and designers have many kinds of relationships to publics and roles within the community. So I'm going to talk about this when I talk about my current book project, but number 5 really connotes the many identities, roles, and responsibilities that artists have through their relationships to public spaces and systems. As artists, they also function as educators, service providers, civil servants, and other forms of labor relationships. And finally, that arts are intrinsically important, full stop, right? We can sort of end the conversation there, right? That arts are intrinsically important to community design and community development because they contribute to other community dynamics that help address community needs and aspirations. Oftentimes, the language of community development, community revitalization, laser focuses on the economics or the sort of socio-political dynamics of relationships, and economic and political dynamics connote a certain hierarchy of power, status, and prestige. And artists really provide a buffer that allows community residents who don't have access to that kind of status, that kind of positional or institutional power, to have a seat at the table. And it's through the arts that we diversify the table, that we actually move away from tables of inclusion to arenas of inclusion. How do we create the conditions for every member of a community's voice and perspective to be heard in the design and implementation of development projects? So the next question we were posed with was, can you share an experience that you've had within the arts that still sticks with you today? So I often think of experiential learning as activities and experiences like making things, performing, observing, or reflecting on a form of visual audio library or performing arts. So here I want to talk about my experience in community with artists from the Pacific Northwest to the borderlands of the US Southwest. And my experience has radically shaped my perspective on the power of creative placemaking and the ability for artists to shift community consciousness inside and outside systems of power, both at the local and the global levels. So my current book project is titled The New Niggerati: Commodification, Power, and the Queering of Hip Hop Radicalism. And it's a book-length manuscript that identifies the ways that hip hop artists contribute to a larger project of queer world making. The project of, which I define as the project of producing capacious counterpublics that register queer belonging, recognizing the quotidian practices or everyday practices of individual and collective action, from creative artistic expression to mobilized activism and placemaking efforts. The book explores the way that Seattle's queer hip hop artists and their co-conspirators inform and lead efforts to transgress local growth machine politics, advancing gentrification and other forms of urban cultural appropriation and erasure. Seattle is a unique city with a very long, rich history, both in terms of Black cultural production that many are often not aware of, but also in terms of its history of transgressive queer political organizing and contributions by Black and other historically marginalized communities in the queering of public space. The city also presents opportunities to observe and critique the ways that queerness has been institutionalized through white racialized governmental mechanisms that often render Black racialized queerness invisible and or insurgent. The book is informed by Black feminist, womanist, and queer discourses. And I define the concept of the new niggerati as three things. It's a genealogical signifier, so it connotes a connection between the contemporary sort of Black production that emerges out of hip hop spaces. It connotes, it links it back to the period of the Harlem Renaissance. It also functions as a creative class. So in the book, I talk about who are the architects of the contemporary hip hop cultural production movement. And it finally functions, I think most importantly, it functions as a heuristic to critically examine hip hop's economic and cultural formations. From music and art to communal placemaking and economic development, hip hop cultural production has advanced dialectical tensions over Black commodity fetishism and the queering of hegemonic Blackness. And I use the term queering here as an articulation of, again, the openness of Black culture rooted in these everyday practices. So I approach the research process as a crate digger. I use that term throughout the book. The epistemological foundation of the book is really informed by an intersectional, sociological, feminist, and Black radical imagination. I see myself as a purveyor of hip hop culture, a lover of hip hop culture, its contributions to mass culture, and how its artifacts and communal practices are interpreted as spaces that produce mediated understandings of subaltern life around the world. DJ scholar Lene Denise coined the term DJ scholarship to reflect how the DJ functions as an archivist, a cultural custodian, and information specialist of music with critical value. And I call upon this practice of crate digging as a methodological tool that aligns critical inquiry and frame analysis with hip hop music traditions. And this is a tradition of hip hop pedagogy and scholarship. In the book, I use this phrase that I call the chop and screw methodology. And really, it comes directly from, if you know much about DJ culture and hip hop, it comes specifically from a remix technique that was created by Houston-based DJ Screw, who's a legend in the Houston hip hop scene. And I won't talk specifically about what it means, but if we get to the Q&A and you have questions, I'm happy to answer that. But essentially, it's about slowing down the sound, slowing down the music in order to amplify the resonance of the lyrics, right? And so this technique is applied, I at least apply the technique in the book to reveal the yearning, loss, and longing for what hip hop has always been for people who see themselves as part of hip hop culture. Oops, let me not do that yet. Here we go. I'm having some issues. 1 second. I need to move my screen up a bit so I can see the rest of my notes. There we go. Okay, sorry, I apologize about that. Oops, now you see all of my notes. There we go. Okay, hopefully that works. So in the book, the book is sort of it's what I call a chopping of years of my research, right? And so this research includes 6 years of ethnographic fieldwork in the city of Seattle, in the hip hop scene, specifically working with queer women of color artists in women-centered spaces in the city, one nonprofit in particular. In-depth interviews, critical discourse analysis of cultural products like music, graffiti art, and videos, policy analysis, and quantitative analysis of global music trends to develop this frame of the new Niggerati, to really examine the production of radical protest art from the underground to the global music industry. So I'll end here with the last question. How can people find out about cultural production and placemaking projects in ASU? And here again, I'll give a final shout out to the studio. The studio is housed between Haida and Watts College. I'm sure many of you who were here earlier, you heard Dr. Chandra Crudup, she's the interim director. Christina Park, who I work closely with on our project, is the assistant director of the studio. And if you're looking for more opportunities to deepen your understanding of creative placemaking and learn about different ways to get more involved at the intersection of art, society, and community building, definitely check out the studio. So I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you for that incredible unpacking, Dr. Ward. We will move on to Dr. Dante McGilvray.
All right, testing. I'm gonna. Okay. What about now? Still there. It's down. How about now? Now?
Can you hear me now?
All right, now? There we go. Okay. Thought it was now, but all right, so it's not, I'm not able to turn the volume down. All right. Hello. All right. All right. So I'm going to stand for mine because I'm going to start off by quickly going through the PowerPoint presentation to describe some of the things that I do and have done. And then I'm planning on ending it with a performance, which is why I had this mic. I wasn't trying to be different, everybody. Just okay. So I'm Dante McGilvray, and as soon as we get the slide up, I can go ahead and get started without it. But what I want to talk about briefly is my work through a nonprofit community-based theater organization that was co-founded by Claire K. Redfield and myself. And so this company is called Sleeveless Acts, ACTS. There we go. Sleeveless Acts. And again, I am the Claire K. Redfield and I are both the co-founder and the co-artistic director of this community-based theater company. This company, we began the plan, we set it out in 2017. We launched the organization, the theater company, in 2018, and we've been on a roll in a mission since. We've been on a roll in a mission since then. And so this next slide are some of the people who make up our company, three of us who are the primary people who make decisions and everything. And that's me. And then there's Alicia Johnson in the middle, who is the playwright, actor, and director, and theater educator. And then the far right side of the screen is Claire K. Redfield. She is MFA co-founder and co-artistic director. We both, Claire and I, began our journey at Herberger as students together. I was in the PhD Theater for Youth program at the time, and Claire was MFA in the same program. And so we launched this organization. So the next page, next slide. All right, our community partners for Sleeveless Acts our First Institutional Baptist Church, which is in the East Lake Park district, and also East Lake Park Community Center. Next slide. I didn't get to talk much about, maybe didn't have that slide as I thought I did, but the mission of Sleeveless Acts is to co-join communities, marginalized communities, to do theater with radical imagination. And that's our mission. And I probably do have it on the slide, but that's our mission. So part of what we do with East Lake Park Partnership is something annual called Celebration East Lake. And I'll get more into that, but this is a picture of late Calvin C. Good. He was the longest councilman who served the city of Phoenix, I believe for 22 years. And he attended our Celebration East Lake Park event in 2019. And so that's a picture of him at the event. And at that event, we honored his story as one of the just primary history makers and movers and shakers in that community. And that's what Celebration East Lake is about. It's about honoring the people that had an impact on the East Lake Park community, this rich community that has a history of justice and as especially more specific to the African American community, as it was the only place that Blacks could go for recreation. And so that's why we focused on this community. Next slide. And so just a few projects that we engaged in and some of the products of those projects. We host a 10-week theater course for students at grades 4 through 8 at East Lake Park. And that ended with a devised production called Little Red and the Wolf, devising with young people at East Lake Park. When we talk about devising, we're talking about the voice of the people make the production, not us as playwrights or quote unquote experts. Same with East Lake Park, the picture that was before this. We researched the community, we interviewed the community members. It took at least a year of collecting information before we put the production on. And the production is put on by people within the community. And so same with the 10-week theater course with youth. They wanted to play the mixed Little Red Riding Hood with Three Little Pigs story. And so, but they devised it on their own. And that ended up, they were on the radio, were able to be interviewed on a radio station. The youth really enjoyed that experience. They also put on a production at the last day of that 10-week at East Lake Park Community Center in front of friends, families, and the community. And they also, Claire Redfield and I also wrote about that experience, and it is has been published in the Rutledge Companion to Drama and Education just last year. And so it's amazing to see all of the product based on the processes that we've been involved in. And then we have something else we've done we work with senior communities, actually through ASU, through OLLI, the lifelong learners program. We work with senior citizens and help them perform their stories. And then Sleeveless Acts community members have co-taught. Members of the community of that East Lake Park community have joined me and others and co-taught classes, community-based theater classes at Princeton Theological Seminary, University of Florida, and we held workshop presentations for the Association for Theater and Higher Education. And these are people, some who don't have a high school, don't have a college degree, some who their first experience in theater was when they worked with us. And so it's amazing to get to see them showcase their knowledge and share that information in other spaces. And something else we've done is held a week-long virtual through the summer of 2020. We held a week-long virtual civil rights monologue class with students in grades 2 through 12, and we traveled throughout the U.S. Southland to learn about the civil rights movement. And then by the end of that class, students had to perform a monologue on someone that they that a person from the movement that they really resonated with. They wrote it on by themselves and performed it. And it was an amazing thing. These were students. We had about maybe 30 students from 3 different states: Texas, Arizona, and California. Those representations from those 3 states. It was a week-long course. And so that's something else amazing we've done. The next slide. Now, this is the class that we taught at Princeton with the students, or I'm sorry, with the community members from the East Lake Park area. We taught a 3-day course there called Defying Joy, the storytelling and dramatization course on joy embodied in Blackness. And so, next slide. That's a little bit more about East Lake. I already explained it. And then this is a picture. Okay, so another thing we do is we connect with, I told you our community partners are East Lake Park Community Center. I just talked about what we do there. The next one is First Institutional Baptist Church. And there we put on an annual production called African American Storytelling Production, something we've been doing since 2018. I was able to, fortunate enough, blessed enough to study under the renowned playwright, Dr. Jokey McElroy, when I was studying at Southern Methodist University. She is the, I mean, you have to Google her later, but she taught for 30 years at Northwestern University. She started there first. She was their first black student to earn a PhD in performance studies, and she taught the first Black theater, basically, class at Northwestern. Years later, I did the same thing here at ASU. First Black male to graduate with a PhD in theater. Thank you. And started the African American theater course that is still being taught today. And this February, in the city of Dallas, they put out a short documentary on both of our lives, Dr. McElroy and me, and how she's my mentor and all of those things. So this production spurred out of a class I took at SMU from Dr. McElroy, and this is the cast of the ones who did this year. We have Justine is here, and her little ones were in this production with us as well. And so it's not just church members; it's community and church. And this is something that I'm interested in writing about even more, about how church spaces cultivate youth for production, for theater performances and other productions. And so this is something we put on, and this storytelling production is specifically, it celebrates the stories and experiences of Black life lifted through Black literary writers. So we celebrate Black scholarship, Black literary writers. And this year we had stories from Dr. Imani Perry, Ta-Nehisi Coates, we had Ernest Gaines, we had Sonia Sanchez. I mean, just about almost any Black major figure that you've ever heard of. And so, next slide. I want to do now a performance of an adaptation of The Passing of Grandison. This was written by Charles Chestnut, but I do this performance because it was the first performance I did when I studied under Dr. Jokey McElroy, and I directed their first African storytelling production. So this is something that I keep on, as they say, in your back pocket, just so. Oh, I turned it on, sorry. Just so I'll perform it now. But this mic won't work? Okay. Okay, this story is called My Hand. I'll do it if it's all good. All right, y'all gonna get it with the mic in my hand, so Colonel Lawrence was a slave master on a large plantation in Kentucky. His only son, Dick Owens, lazy as the devil. The 22-year-old said, I don't have to do nothing serious. My father is rich and I inherited all this wealth and possession. Well, young Owens wanted to win the favorable attention of a young lady by the name of Charity. Charity told Owens, oh, I could just love a man who dared to do something for humanity. So young Owens said, I've got an idea. Would you love me if I ran one of my father's Negroes off to Canada? The old man got too many slaves anyway, and by doing so, I'll show you I'm capable of doing more than playing cards, drinking, and fox hunting. So Owens decided to go to the colonel and tell him that he had plans to go off to New York and to Boston. The colonel said, well, you'll need a body servant, and I think Grandison is the one. He's too fond of good eating to risk losing his regular meals, and he's sweet on your mother's maid, Betty, and I promise to let him get married before long. So the colonel called for Grandison. Grandison! Sir, yes, sir. Grandison, I have a few questions for you. Do you think yourself a great deal better off than those poor free Negroes up north who ain't got no kind master or no mistress to look after them when they sick? Or no, well, sir, yes, sir, indeed, I is better off than those poor free Negroes up north, sir. I mean, if anybody asks them who they belong to, they gotta say nobody. Me, I ain't got no reason to be ashamed to tell them, sir. Indeed, I ain't. Indeed, I ain't. Well, by this time, the colonel was beaming. This was their loyal slave. So the colonel, he sent his son Owen and Grandison off to the north, knowing that Grandison, his loyal slave, was abolitionist proof. In New York, young Owens gave Grandison every opportunity to escape. He left him money and told him to feel free to do what he wanted. But each night, Grandison was on deck, ready to serve his young master. After spending time in New York, the two went off to Boston. In Boston, young Owens told Grandison, well, I shall go and I'll be gone for a couple of days, but I shall leave you here. In fact, I'll leave $100 in this drawer and give you the key. Have yourself a good time. Spend it all if you like. To his dismay, when he returned, the $100 still intact, and Grandison still on deck, ready to serve his young master. Now, by this time, young Owens was vexed, but he just could not express himself to Grandison. So he thought of another idea. He would extend the trip to the Niagara Falls. One day, the two stood on the Canada side. Young Owens said, Grandison, I should go up the road a bit, but feel free to do what you want. Don't worry about me at all. To his dismay, Grandison ran out on the street sleeping the time of day. But this time, young Owens decided to walk right over him and went all the way back home to Kentucky without him. Oh, on the plantation, you should have seen the colonel. Oh, he cursed and raged those cold-blooded abolitionists who were only about stealing slaves. And so the colonel, being upset, decided to wait a few days. 3 weeks later, Charity and Owen, well, they got married. One day, the two were seated on the veranda when the colonel arrived in a buggy, and seated next to him was Grandison. But this time, Grandison had the look, he was travel stained. He had the look of deprivation on his face. And the colonel got out of the buggy, marched towards Owen, and repeated Grandison's story. Owen, Grandison did not run away. While he was kidnapped by those cold-blooded abolitionists, locked in a hut in the Canadian forest, fed bread and water for 3 weeks. But Al Grandison, by turning his back on the North Star, hopscotching on the heads of 6 alligators, Al Grandison made it all to the plantation, back to his family, back to his masters. That's our loyal slave. Well, one morning, the colonel woke up and he called for Listen, but no one responded. He called for Betty, Granny's wife, and no one responded. Elise, Tom, John, and no one responded. Oh, the colonel cursed in rage. Go find the weapons of my valuable property. Not once, not twice, but just when the colonel thought he had a grip on it, they seemed to slip right through. And then one day on the stem of a small steamboat, which was receding rapidly from the wharf of Lake Erie, there stood a group of familiar Black faces. The colonel spotted Grandison as Grandison waved his hand derisively at the colonel. The colonel upset, he pumped his fist impotently, but it was too late. They had already escaped. The incident was over.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I'm so happy to be here to witness this today. Can I have another round of applause? We don't get that every day. All right, moving on. All right, I guess we're moving on to artist and scholar Grisha Coleman.
Turn on the mic. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm on Zoom and I have a mic. So, or I can just speak loudly. I'm happy to speak loudly. Oh.
Just want to make sure.
Mhm. It's up, but it's about to be on. Okay, we'll just go like that. Let me just do it like that.
Thank you for your patience, everyone online. We want to get it right for you.
Can everyone see? Yeah. So far, so good. Hi, everyone. Oh, boy. Hi. I know it's the end of the day, so I appreciate you. I know that oh. I'll try that for a second. Okay. Turn it on. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Grisha Coleman, and I am an artist working across movement, media, digital media, or technology, and race, critical studies on race. So, oh my gosh! So today I'm gonna show you one project that I am working on right now that I think is interesting, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about it, okay? So that project is called the Movement Under Commons. Yeah, when I turn it off or on. Let's see how that works. So I worked here for about 10 years until January of this year. I worked in the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering, and I'd say as an artist and scholar, I'm working across domains of human movement, digital media, and time-based performance. The work explores relational nature of our physiology, technology, and ecological systems, our movement, our machines, and the places we inhabit. I engage this exploration in explicit and broadly interdisciplinary ways, centering presence and experience to counter conventional dichotomies of quantitative and qualitative thought, to approach a kind of embodied research justice. I'm in pursuit of creative responses to these themes along multiple dimensions. Okay. No, because it'll never. But yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay. We're large like that. Yeah. All right. So what does that look like? What has that looked like? It's looked like a public art robot created in the center of a white collar business plaza in a blighted downtown Pittsburgh with spontaneous gesture driven recomposition of the city's Black jazz legacies. A robot to move the people based on a musician named Butch Morris, a jazz musician named Butch Morris, who created a how do you call it, a conduction method for free jazz. But the reason that we did it there in Pittsburgh is because Pittsburgh is central to jazz legacies, from Art Blakey and the Messengers to Billy Strayhorn to on and on. But we're not talking about that today. It's also looked like a choreography to dance with hacked treadmills, bringing a life of a myth of a people who go on a modern vision quest by running in place. Or this is a still from a project that I did in Los Angeles, part of a bigger project with the hack treadmills called Ecosystem, where the divers are wrapped in a pulley system that that is mirroring a virtual abyssal layer of the ocean. So I know this sounds extremely nerdy. I feel you, but let me tell you why I'm doing this. Why should computer scientists read African-American poets? What does information science have to do with race critical or feminist methods and metaphysics? The collective wisdom in those domains is one of the richest places from which to understand these core problems in information systems design, how to preserve the integrity of information without a priori standardization and its often attendant violence. In turn, if those lessons can be taken seriously within the emerging cyber world, there may yet be a chance to strengthen its democratic ethical aspects. And that's a quote from a book called Sorting Things Out, Classification and Its Consequences, through a friend of mine, an engineer, D. Fox Harrell. But maybe to bring it a little closer to home, I'm gonna read 3 quotes from old friends of mine, good friends of mine. Because often I have to justify the link of why I would look at embodiment, look at Blackness, and look at technology together. So I think one of the core ideas for the movement Undercommons, the one I'm working on now, is the idea of decentralizing the technological gaze. So as cultural critic and musician Greg Tate said, so if you look at the work of Black visual artists, from graffiti artists to Basquiat, there's always this insertion of Black figures into a visionary landscape, if not a science fiction or fantasy landscape. The imaginative leap that we associate with science fiction in terms of putting the human into an alien and alienating environment is a gesture that is repeatedly appears in the work of Black writers and visual artists. That's Greg in the 80s. He's writing this stuff in a book around Afrofuturism. Then a close association of Greg, Arthur Jafa, speaks about Blackness and technology this way. Techno, I see as being a very specific product of Detroit and Black people's relationship to technology, because we were the first technology. We are the technology that drove the American industrial engine. Our relationship to technology is very particular. What I would say is that club music, of which techno is part, is DJ-based music. It's not instrumental. The mix is it, meaning it's not played with instruments. The mix is it. The mix is in the face of linear thinking in opposition to reductive thinking. And then one last quote from my sister, Beth Coleman, who's a cultural theorist and media artist. In her article called Race and Technology, she said it this way: I ask the reader to consider race as technology. This proposition moves race away from the biological and genetic systems that have historically dominated its definition towards questions of technological agency. Race as technology recognizes the proper place of race, not as a trait, but as a tool for good or for ill, to conceptualize how race fits into a larger pattern of meaning and power. The question comes down to this: who organizes the pattern? So let me show you some art. The movement under Commons, technology resistance, future archives, some origin questions that, like, how do you start an art project? Like you just heard, what are the origins of how you made that piece? What is conveyed through our movements? Can we speak of a movement identity, some combination of biological, environmental, and embodied cultural experience that distinguishes an individual or a people? And would such an identity shift as we travel from one place to another? During a trip to Marseille in 2016, I witnessed communities of former French and North African colonies with distinct and recognizable patterns of movement expression, some of who had lived in southern France for decades, or younger ones who had never lived in the countries they're elder. This project centers questions of movement vernaculars, namely, with millions of people displaced every day, which ways of life are carried along through expressions of the body, which vernaculars persist, and which are vanishing. Movement under Commons explores possibilities, latent mobile motion capture, MoCap, which we call MoCap technology, to create a series of movement portraits. So that's what you're looking at now. You're looking at a prototype of a friend of mine named Ghulam. I'll just keep it with first names because it's his data that you're looking at, his movement data. He's a South African artist, and he was in Phoenix doing murals for children who come in through the Welcome Center, almost exclusively refugee status. So the work aims to utilize the expressive significance of an individual's movement patterns, one's dynamic movement fingerprint, using the recent advances that allow this MoCap technology to be mobile. Yeah, we're trying to rethink this new technology to collaborate with, let me put it this way, who has access to the technology? Hollywood has access to the technology. ASU has access to the technology, but everyone else has access to phones. So you can take pictures, you can take video, but not this movement data. Um, the idea is to go and work in situ with people who are working, whose movement is connected to their labor, but they're not Martha Graham. They're not Bill T. Jones even, they're not Merce Cunningham. They're not virtuosic movers in the way that we define it. They're not gold medalists. They're not sports people. They're not typically protagonists of this kind of technology. So the mobile aspect of it allows us to incorporate the cultural, socioeconomic, and historical contexts in which human movement is inextricably embedded. So let me show you another one. Okay, I won't do that because what do we have? Like a couple more minutes. Yeah, I got you. Another few more minutes. The project shows we're working on, one is the portraits that we make with the data, and the other is this idea of a future archive. I'll show you the future archive right at the end, because if I get out of PowerPoint, it's a disaster. I'm sorry, it just is. All right, let me show you another. These are sort of the research aspects of it. Critically, movement undercommons highlights, well, how can I say this? As ethnographer Dwight Conkergood articulates, subordinate people do not have the privilege of explicitness, and the visual verbal bias of Western regimes of knowledge blinds researchers to meanings that are expressed forcefully through intonation, through silence, through body tension, arched eyebrows, blank stares, the elocutionary experience of a fugitive communication. By centering movement as the storytelling modality, if you will, this project values alternative ways to derive narratives and extends the scope and impact of the stories we tell. Let me show you, of course, I'm going to pull Fred because Fred Moten. I won't talk about him so much. Here's a picture of what I mean when I say we go out and capture data. This is an example of what raw data looks like. You probably don't need to see this, but it's kind of helpful to understand, like if you were gonna go and make a table or make a chair or what have you, you'd have to go out and get the wood. Back in the day, you wouldn't go to the Home Depot. What does it mean? You know, what's the whole arc of it? And the reason that you want to think about this and why this might be important is because there's always a kind of, because this is a creative response to data, as opposed to this response, which is the work of brilliant colleagues, Ruha Benjamin, Autumn Womack, Sophia Noble, AI for Africa, Timnit Gebru, Joy Buolamwini, who think a lot about, you know, bias in algorithm and all the ways that data can hurt us, you know. So that's why I'm thinking about it. But, you know, I want to show you two more portraits. And then this is a Haitian drummer named Val, a friend of mine. So we're important to say we're prototyping these. We're experimenting with how we might express it, you know? I think I want to end with one other. Abdul, sorry, Abdul is a Sudanese farmer in Phoenix, but I'm going to go with Robin, who's a crossing guard in front of my son's school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, 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 yes.
Tell me how I made all falling and rising all these years.
Look, I'm gonna tell you something, girls. This job, I love doing this, okay? Let me tell you that right now. I started doing this in 2005. The story was, I had another job before this with the city. I was a custodian in one of the schools, one of the preschools. It's funny, they called me and said, oh, da-da-da, you can become a traffic cop. And actually, let me tell you something. I talk to all the kids and the parents. I talk to everybody because I'm a talkative person. And, you know, I ran into some of the kids. I still run into some of the kids. You know, they said to me, I'm in college or I'm out of college. I'll be like, what? I said to them, oh, you always trying to tell me it's time for me to retire? They be laughing. I'm like, I've already seen them grow up, man, and still seeing kids, these kids, you know, and I don't forget a face. And some parents are like, how did you remember that? Because I said, I remember you. And the parents are like, then they realized, they're like, yeah, they tell me, oh, you were all the way in North Cambridge. I worked in, you know, because I work in different areas. My dad's originally from Mississippi. His dad moved to Chicago. And my granddad told me the whole story. How my granddad told me, you know, back in the day that he was getting ripped off picking cotton. He said to his wife that, oh, I'm going to go to Chicago and find a job. And I'll come back to you guys. So.
What type of music were you listening to?
Gospel. That's all I listen to. Like, oh, makes my day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Meow. Questions? All right, from the audience. All right, should I use my mic? All right. I can take my seat. Do you have any questions from the audience? Anyone about art? Someone has a question. Mine. Oh, well, for me, I love hearing from artists. I'm not an ASU graduate. I have nothing to do with ASU, but you know, I'm from a family who has most of my mom or aunt, all my aunts and uncles, my uncle's in the Cronkite Hall of Fame. But the other side of that is my grandparents has stressed education, but they also, my grandmother bought a piano with her, she worked as a domestic for a piano teacher. So all of her daughters were going to learn to play that piano. It was like that. You're going to get an education and you're going to have an artistic skill. My being a professional dancer, traveling the world, you don't need to hear about me. But that's brought me back here. And one of the great things I get to work on is a Juneteenth event at my museum, my beautiful museum. Last year was the first year and it was great. There was dance, there was local history, local Black history that people don't know about. And we got to educate the community at large on Juneteenth. What we learned was that there are a lot of different traditions. You know, we like to say, my family moved here. Hey, we're from Money, Mississippi. Money, Mississippi, Emmett Till. And they fled, my family fled there too because of the racial strife that was going on as well. And so that you know, it worked out coming out here and everything. And my mother's a gospel singer. I'm a dancer. You know, there's art is in our blood. It's in our, you know, and it's great to be able to share and pass it on. But one of the most important things for me is visibility. I would have never, if I hadn't seen this Black Nutcracker Prince when I was a kid, the light bulb would have never gone off for myself, and I would have never followed my dreams. I would never have gone and had this career and come back to be teaching. I teach ballroom dance for fifth graders right now in South Phoenix. I've been doing it for about a decade and watching the whole energy change, their elegance change. One of the things I was thinking about when Dr. Ward was speaking was within the community, you were talking about queerness, and I got into a conversation this week online about, I think it was that Billy Porter is going to play James Baldwin, and in the comments, of course, it felt like people from my own community wanted to kind of neutralize both these characters' queerness out of it, and that needed to happen to really honor James Baldwin for some reason. And I'm just wondering if I could maybe hear Dr. Ward or either of you comment on that real quick.
Dr. Ward, did you want to, or Dante or Grisha, anyone want to answer Todd's question?
I can start. I mean, I think that,
Thank you.
thank you for bringing up that beautiful example. I mean, the example that oftentimes the arts is a place where we celebrate. We also find meaning in the tragic. And one of the tragedies of not just the Black community, but of all communities that have had their sort of, that have somehow been touched by this heteropatriarchy, and I can't imagine a community on the planet that has not, is its violent attack on queer bodies and queer subjectivities, queer culture, queer ways of being, knowing in the world. And I think that oftentimes, especially in a US context, communities of color in the 21st century become these scapegoats for areas that are not quote unquote civil, to use Dr. Orr's concepts, that are not civil and or modernized. And one of the sort of ways in which in the contemporary period we connote civility is through our acceptance of differently situated gender and sexual bodies. And so for communities that have not embraced, and by communities here, I mean the institutions that dominate or that have its footprint on defining what constitutes Blackness, right? So the church in that sort of large sense, you know, certain entertainment spaces that Black folks have dominated and occupied. I think that part of the narrative of Black queer identities is that we've always been here. There's not a time when we haven't been present, even in the history of the church. If not for queer bodies, what would we know gospel to be? If not for queer bodies, what would we know rock music to be? If not for queer bodies, what would we know the Black creative sort of enterprise to be? Full stop. And so I think that to your question, there is a desire to reimagine queerness out of histories. And that's not just specific to Black community, that's in all communities. And we have to be vigilant when we are telling a history of Black experience. All that experience has always, queer folks have always been present. You can't write the queerness out of a figure like James Baldwin. He won't let you. As an ancestor, it's not possible. You cannot tell the story of James Baldwin without telling the full narrative of who he was, what he wrote about. And I'll end here with the idea that, you know, James Baldwin was one of the Black writers who didn't just write about the Black experience. One of his most beloved books now, at the time when it was published, was not seen as beloved, was Giovanni's Room. And Giovanni's Room is a narrative about a white male American, you know, traveling to Europe and finding and exploring his identity. And so Black writers having the possibility to imagine whiteness in different ways. I think he's one of those authors who gave us, it's not that we need permission, but open the door for Black writers to write about the universe of experience outside of Blackness. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. We really appreciate that. And thank you to our final panel of the afternoon, Todd, Donta, Grisha, Mako. Thank you all so very much. We really appreciate you. We're kind of behind on our timing here, but we want to give the opportunity to round back around to our first panel this morning and give a chance for Dr. Anthony Pratcher, who has agreed to do his small presentation that he was going to present this morning. We're going to give him the opportunity now to go ahead and do that. So we're going to upload Anthony's presentation. And Anthony, if you can go ahead and start to come online, we're going to go ahead and upload your stuff and get you in that spot. Thank you all. Thank you. Seriously, appreciate you all.